سلام عليكم ورحمة الله. لعل الهند قطعت خطوات مهمة وبارزة في مجال التكنولوجيا وتنمية الموارد البشرية، إلا أن التقارير تشير إلى تصاعد حالات التمييز الخطرة ضد السكان الأصليين ومكونات هندية أخرى. نيلوفر بهاغوات أستاذة القانون والمحامية الناشطة من الهند تحدثنا عن الهند وعلاقاتها وسياستها ومقاربتها اليوم من الداخل. معكم زينب صفار، تابعونا. لعل الهند هي سابع أكبر دولة في العالم من حيث المساحة، والثاني أكبر بلد من حيث عدد السكان، حيث يبلغ عدد سكانها أكثر من 1,300,000,000 نسمة. ولعل للدين مكانة بارزة في المجتمع الهندي، فهو يؤدي دورا مهما في تحديد هوية الفرد. الهندوسية هي الديانة الأكثر شيوعا، يليها الإسلام والمجموعات الدينية الأخرى من المسيحية والبوذية والسيخ وسواها. وقد تنافست هذه الجماعات الدينية في كثير من الأحيان بعنف في الماضي من أجل السيطرة على الموارد، وتواصل القيام بذلك في الوقت الحاضر، وهذا يبرز الدور الذي يمكن أن تؤديه الهوية الدينية في المجالات الاجتماعية والسياسية. وبالرغم من أن الهند قامت بخطوات مهمة وبارزة في مجال التكنولوجيا وتنمية الموارد البشرية، مع ذلك سجلت مخالفات متنوعة متعلقة بعمليات تمييز خطيرة ضد الداليت أو المنبوذين خارج نظام الكاست، والذي يمثلون 16% من مواطني الهند، والأقليات التي تمثل 14%، وأبناء القبائل أو الأديفاسي أو سكان الهند الأصليين الذين يمثلون 8%، وبذلك يمثل مجموعهم قرابة 40% من سكان الهند بحسب المطلعين. نيلوفر بهاغوات القانونية والقاضية الهندية ونائبة رئيس اتحاد المحامين الهندي، كيف تفسر هذه المقاربة الخطرة ومن ينتهجها ولماذا؟
It is directly related to the nature of economic policies that we adopted in 91-92, which is broadly known as neoliberal economics. And these policies resulted in stratification of society, a wide gap developing between the elite sections and the others. And as you know, that we have sociologically the caste system in India.
Exactly.
And despite constitutional provisions to eradicate caste, somehow the on-the-ground changes and social revolution which should have taken place following political revolution of independence, unfortunately did not take place. And it so happens that these classes and sections you have referred to, namely the minorities, the Dalits and the indigenous or tribal people,
Adivasis,
they also happen to be the poorest section of society and the ones who are
suffering a lot,
whom policies, these economic policies have adversely impacted. And
most of the crimes that are committed against the Dalits and the Adivasis.
There has been a direct connection between the economic policies and fascistic trends in Indian society.
You mean the RSS?
It's the
approach?
It is the Rashtra Sevak Sangh.
Because many accuse the RSS of endangering India's fragile religious peace.
It is true that the Rashtra Sevak Sangh is the backbone behind the Bharatiya Janata Party, which is the political front
the
of
ruling
the RSS.
party.
Yes. But just like we have seen fundamentalist forces and reactionary and fascistic forces based on religion in other parts of the world. In India too, there are all kinds of fascistic fringe groups. Even apart from the Rashtriya Sevak Sangh and the BJP, there are other fringe groups or front groups who are activated. The real reason for that activation and the real reason for the attack on these sections is that these sections of society should not work towards a political change. There is an apprehension that these sections are the worst impacted by economic policies, and if they are not kept in check, the reason for the violence is to roll them back politically. Earlier, these very sections had a voice in the political parties in India.
But allow me here to ask you about something related to Christoph Jaffelot, who is a visiting professor at Princeton University. He has written a book on the RSS, and he said the Modi government will give to India a much more Hinduized public space in terms of symbols and discourse. To what extent do such fears have a foundation today in India, particularly in light of the recent results of the parliamentary elections that was a kind of landslide victory for Modi and the BJP?
The real issue is that, and you'll be surprised at what I am about to say, which is that what the BJP and the Prime Minister and the RSS represent is anti what we broadly call Hinduism in the country.
In what sense?
They are misusing. They are misusing a broad, a religious stream which has always welcomed people from other religious groups. As you know, we have large minorities in India. And the father of the Indian freedom movement, which was anti-imperialist,
who are components of the Indian society.
Mahatma
actually.
Gandhi was, I would say, the finest representative of the Hindu community in India and internationally. We are extremely proud of him. But Gandhiji's Hinduism was genuine. Whereas the Hinduism which is being talked about is not Hinduism, it's Hindutva. It's a fascistic construct, just as you would never identify Daesh with Islam.
An extreme construct.
Daesh, just like Daesh is un-Islamic. The RSS and the fringe, the fanatical fringe groups who are being encouraged by the Bharatiya Janata Party, they do not represent genuine Hinduism. This is a fascistic construct which they call Hindutva, which is absolutely in its principles, in its propositions, completely anti-Hinduism.
Right. Allow me to stop you here, ma'am, because we're going to take a short break, and then afterwards we'll continue talking about this, and we will talk about Rahul Gandhi's resignation in this sense. Why did he resign? Because of certain matters related to the institutions backing and support of the Modi government. But after the break, ma'am. إذا فاصل قصير ونعود. لا تذهبوا بعيد. بمراقبة المجريات المتسارعة في الهند، كيف تقيم نيلوفر بهاغوات القانونية والقاضية الهندية ونائبة رئيس اتحاد المحامين الهندي الربع الأول من هذا القرن مقارنة مع الأوضاع القائمة، وما طبيعة المعارضات السياسية في شبه القارة الهندية؟
India, in the first 2 decades of this century, is showing contradictions. We're at the crossroads. On the one hand, remarkable achievements in every field of human endeavor, whether it's science, technology, or any other field. We are comparable to the best in the world today. And that is reflected in how the world sees India. It is seeing India through the remarkable individual achievements and achievements of institutions in India which have been given autonomy from the political system, like our space organization, the ISRO. The foundations were laid by Jawaharlal Nehru, the first Prime Minister, and by Mrs. Indira Gandhi. And those achievements today are remarkable. The world sees those achievements, but the situation in the country is serious because there's political and social regress due to the adoption of the kind of policies which have resulted in attacks on the Muslim minorities, on the Dalits,
the one you referred to at
on
the
the
beginning
tribal
of the
people,
interview.
and these sections are very unsafe. There have been assassinations of writers.
Not to talk about the situation of women also in the Indian society.
Of course, the situation of women is well known because increasingly, despite the fact that there are women in the workplace, women in workplaces all over the country, the social situation for women is worse than it was a quarter century ago.
Unfortunately, despite all this advancement when it comes to science, technology, sports, movies, Bollywood, everything, yet this does not reflect what is the status of women in the Indian society today.
It's a very, very challenging situation for women.
Here, do we have a political opposition when it comes to talking about opposing forces to this kind of trajectory of politics in India today?
There again,
and I would appreciate if you can tell me something regarding Rahul Gandhi's resignation letter as leader of India's Congress Party.
when you ask me about political opposition, I would like to emphasize that the last 25 years have seen a failure on the political front of many political parties, and therefore the advance of these forces who constitute political, economic and social regress. There's been a failure on the part of the centrist and left parties to understand the situation, to analyze the situation, and to organize themselves to project themselves as a viable political alternative. But on the other hand, there is political opposition in India from the masses of the people who have constituted themselves into different organizations. For example, there's a vibrant farmers' movement opposing the policies of the government. So despite the fact that the leadership of political parties has been weak, yet this does not mean that there is no political opposition in India. There is political opposition, and it questions the legitimacy of the government, because it is revealed that even though they have voted themselves into power through the electronic voting machine, in elections being held to local bodies, to district councils, which we call Jilla Parishads, to municipalities, wherever paper ballot is being used, the BJP and RSS are not being voted into power. Surprisingly, a very perceptive analysis of the political situation came from Rahul Gandhi, who of course is the grandson of Indira Gandhi. And in a letter of resignation where he wanted to accept responsibility for what he termed was an electoral defeat.
He lost his seat.
But he won a seat in South India. He lost a seat in North India in the same election. But this letter revealed much more than what it was intended to, possibly. He stated that what the opposition had faced in this election was adversity in the sense that all the institutions of the state were working against the election of the Congress party. Secondly, he said that the manner in which the election has been conducted and held, it raised the question as to whether the electoral process, if it was carried on the way it has been carried out, would at all result in a change. What he was hinting at, that it would be difficult unless the institutions of the state are democratized to conduct a free and fair election in India.
And do you see the light at the end of the tunnel concerning this?
Yes.
In India today,
In India,
under Modi's government, with this great big comeback?
I see light. I see light because in the elections held within 2 weeks or 3 weeks of the election of their so-called massive mandate, different parties were being elected to the district councils, to the municipalities, to all local bodies.
Right.
And to certain state assemblies.
Not related to the
Not related,
BJP.
nothing to do with the
With
BJP.
BJP.
And the BJP was being massively defeated.
Defeated because...
Wherever the paper ballot was used.
Right. Do you see also a light at the end of the tunnel when it comes to the Kashmir crisis? I mean, how do you describe the status quo of Kashmir today, and how do you explain the recent incidents of violence taking place in the valley?
Actually, the developments in Kashmir have caused serious concern
And pain,
and pain
of course.
among all right-thinking people in India, including centrist and left parties, though they have not been able to really stand by the people of the valley. And the reason being that actually the state government in the valley and the central government, particularly after the alliance of Mehbooba with the BJP, which was an alliance which was not acceptable to the Kashmiri people because it is a Hindutva fascist party. Unacceptable. The violence has doubled. Unfortunately, the methods used
I would like you to highlight these methods.
the methods
Violent methods.
the methods that were used were totally disproportionate.
What do you mean by disproportionate? What did they use?
Shockingly, cluster pellets have been used.
Those are internationally banned.
Cluster pellets were sold or rather dumped on India by the Israeli government. And the reason why they would come under the broad ban of prohibited weapons, though they have not been officially listed, because they have not been really used yet elsewhere
So
as much as
it was a
in the
trial
valley. It was a
space.
trial space. Because it's an indiscriminate weapon. It's a disproportionate weapon. It harms civilians who are not involved in any kind of act against state forces. I'll analyze and explain, describe what the weapon is. Just like you have cluster bombs, where a bomb explodes, and then hundreds of cluster bombs are spread all over the countryside. And Lebanon had witnessed such bombing operations, and they are being carried out in Yemen by the Saudi Arabian government and the alliance. The cluster bullets are bullets which are being used for crowd control, intended. If a bullet is fired at a crowd which is violent, hundreds of pellets, these are pellets, fly in different directions.
And they use them to disperse crowds, you mean?
And they were using it as a method of dispersing a crowd when it is not a method of control, because in the process of firing the cluster pellet, hundreds of pellets fly in different directions. And passers-by, literally anybody can be hurt and affected. And the most lethal part of it is that people have lost
Their
about
eyes.
1,500 to 2,000 people have lost one eye or both eyes. And this disproportionate use of force by the paramilitary and military organizations has resulted in escalation of the violence.
The Bar Association, how does it approach such kind of incidents? Do they raise certain kind of suits against those who are using such kind of weapons?
See, the Bar Association was active. In fact, the issues have gone to the courts. But there is a problem.
It's a delicate issue when it comes to Kashmir.
No, we find that though we always claimed that we have an independent judiciary, unfortunately, during a period when India most needed a firm stand by the Supreme Court on this among other issues, we found that the Supreme Court did not live up to the constitutional mandate. For the civilians who die in those cross-border firings between two countries who are using the Kashmir issue, both governments, for internal political advancement. Pakistan, to show its people, whenever it wants a diversion, it talks about Kashmir. The Indian government, whenever it wants to frighten the Indian people against Muslim minorities, talks about terrorism and separatist elements in the valley. Both governments, according to me, have been using the Kashmir issue to advance their internal political cause.
Yes, we heard.
And for political purposes. And for diversions.
We hope that finally Kashmir might get the peace that the people of Kashmir actually deserve to live with. I have lots of other questions, Dr. Nيلوفر, to talk about, but unfortunately time has run short. Nيلوفر Bhagwat, Indian Professor of Law and Vice President of the Indian Bar Association. Many thanks indeed for joining us, ma'am.
It's been my pleasure to be here in Lebanon with you again.
Most welcome, ma'am. Most welcome. إلى لقاء جديد في الأسبوع المقبل مع ضيف جديد وقضية جديدة ودائما من الداخل. للمزيد من التواصل تابعونا على صفحات التواصل الاجتماعي، السوشيال ميديا، من كل فريق عمل البرنامج من كل الميادين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.